Hello there, John Kuturillo here, the life coach of your listener. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Today, I'd like to discuss a critique of academia, and I'd like to preface by saying that this is not a criticism of the character of academics as such, of any person in particular, and it's certainly not stating that academia in and of itself has no use. Being considerably studied myself, I certainly see the value in learning, and for us to continue learning and to think critically is incredibly important to humanity. But with the central importance of academia to our advancement as a society, it's essential that we continuously constructively critique our practice. So today I'd like to exemplify some of the concerns that we can have in academia. I'm certainly not giving advice on how you should approach academia, and I'm not criticizing the character of any of the people involved in this particular discussion. It's simply a constructive evaluation. I'm hoping to stimulate discussion and explore ideas. One of the main issues I see in academia is that it often involves too much verbosity or complexity of communication. By that I mean what's often communicated in academia can be communicated in other ways that are considerably simpler but still convey exactly the same teachings. And there's a particular psychological tendency which is relevant to this. The human mind tends to evaluate the quality of messages by a heuristic, that is to say, a mental shortcut that is designed to save mental effort. That heuristic is by using the way that a message is presented to evaluate the quality rather than the content of messages. Which is not to say that people don't think critically, but there is a general tendency that when we interpret a message, we mistake the complexity or the sophistication of the language used or the way the message is delivered as some form of authority or authenticity of message. That is to say, when something is presented in an academic way using incredibly formal or specific language or in an incredibly verbose manner, the heuristic can lead people to interpret that as having particular authority or particular validity simply based on that, without a lot of analysis of the content of the message. And I have a theory that often complexity may be encouraged in academia because even academics themselves are subject to this heuristic, and they mistake the simplicity of a message as the message being missing some crucial aspects, and hence they tend to be too verbose. And when lecturers mark university student assignments, they may be too often influenced by whether somebody has been simple or complex in the way they've communicated a message, and may evaluate a complex message as being more comprehensive than a simple message, even if the essential ideas communicated are exactly the same when they're analysed properly. Now, I can't comment on how widespread this particular phenomena may be. I can't comment whether this particular error of judgment is made by a certain number of university lecturers or academics. What I can say is that I have witnessed events that lead me to believe that this may be a phenomenon, and it's something that's worth considering for everybody in academia. And I'd like to use a specific example of a conversation that I once had with an academic to exemplify how this may manifest. Now, this was not an agitated conversation of any sort, and it certainly wasn't a case of me criticizing the actual person involved or the academics whom I was critiquing. It was simply a disagreement that we had, and it was respectful. Now, in this particular conversation, myself and an academic were discussing the definition of an idea called the sociological imagination, which is something that was discussed by a sociologist named C. Wright Mills. Now, in this discussion, I argued that the sociological imagination could be defined thus: a mindset which involves understanding the relationship between an individual and the system of other people in which they live. The person with whom I was discussing this disagreed, and they argued that I should include the term milieu, which is a term that Mills himself used, in my definition. Now, here I'm going to analyse in depth why I believe the use of the word milieu in this instance was unnecessary. Jacobs and Malpas, whose reference is in the description, define milieu as the social setting of a person that is directly open to his personal experience. Now, let us analyse the terminology here. Whenever we refer to an idea that is social, it involves other people. And when we refer to a system, we're referring to a set of cooperating components. And in addition to this, when we refer to milieu as the social setting of a person that is directly open to their personal experience, the use of the term personal experience here is arguably redundant, because if somebody is relating to other people in some way, then inevitably there will be some experience had in that process of relating. So by my use of the term system of other people, what I was actually doing was demonstrating that I understood what the true essence of milieu was. In fact, I was deliberately trying to avoid using terms such as social, because when we are defining a term, it's imperative that we don't use terms that are a derivative of the actual term itself in the definition. So when using terms such as sociology, avoiding the term social and using other words that accurately reflect what it means demonstrates your understanding. So here, I was able to identify that when something is social, it involves other people. When it involves a setting, it means a system of other people cooperating with each other to form a collective. And this is a practical definition because any person, regardless of their academic standing, could take this definition and have an approximate understanding of what it means. Now, again, this is my opinion, and being someone who spends his life working with other people to help them overcome difficulty and having to communicate on a deep level, I do believe it's an informed one. But as I said, this is not a criticism of any person's intelligence, it's a constructive evaluation of an idea. The fact that I've had these types of conversations, though, does concern me because what it suggests is that beyond verbosity, academia can be somewhat of a self-sustaining phenomenon. The practical purpose of a field of study should be to advance knowledge so that society can live in greater quality and in greater comfort, to enhance the relationships that we have with each other and with nature. It shouldn't be to self-sustain. There's no point in a field that is so privileged and having so much power to help the world existing simply for the sake of sophistication. Sometimes in academia it seems that people are encouraged to use words just because it demonstrates a certain affiliation with a particular field. Because we're in such a privileged position and because we have so much power, we should be harnessing that power to help humanity. Simply trying to demonstrate our affiliations is not a practical pursuit. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't produce an outcome that is beneficial to the greater good. And another aspect of this conversation I had that was relevant to this is that I was drawing on references from the field of psychology in my conversation with this person, whereas the other person was arguing that I should only be drawing on sociological references, seeing as these were more relevant to the discussion. Now, such an attitude, in my opinion, is not conducive to proper study, to proper academia. The pursuit of academia should be the pursuit of objective reality, an understanding of reality that is not biased by our personal beliefs or our cognition. By only restricting ourselves to resources that have one perspective, what we're actually doing is implicitly asserting that that one perspective is true. Even though sociologists do claim that they explore a range of perspectives, sociology explores the world from nonetheless a perspective that is different to other fields. And whether that's incorrect or correct is not the subject of the discussion. But what can be said is that the more information upon which we draw, the better positioned we are to understand objective reality, because we can then analyze each collection of information and make a decision based on what we've analysed on which is more likely to be valid and which is more likely to be invalid. But only once we've analysed that information can we make that decision. We should not be limiting the information that we analyse. Now, some may say that I'm cherry picking an example here, and technically I am. The reason I am is that I could use a large number of examples, but it would make this episode incredibly cumbersome and you may well be bored with it. What I've done is used a prime example from my own experience. What I'd like to do is invite my audience to send me examples of academia, whether they believe it's too verbose or not, and I'd be happy to analyse it in future episodes if it's appropriate to do so, and we can discuss if the message could indeed be simplified without losing any essential meaning. Whether you agree or disagree with my evaluation, I'd love to hear from you in any case, because this is what I aim to do, to be able to discuss ideas and advance each other's knowledge of the world by sharing and analysing information. So thank you for joining me for today's episode. As always, I'd like to hear from you, and please do not take what I say as advice. I'm not instructing anybody on how to practice their field or how to live their life. This is a perspective, and I'm hoping that by sharing this perspective I can stimulate discussion, even if you don't agree. Until next time, take care.